welcome to Covered. I'm Vince Morgan, and today we have a wonderful guest, our newest colleague here at Bracewell, Suzanne Day. So Suzanne, welcome to Covered. We're delighted to have you both here at Bracewell as part of our team, but also on our podcast. So welcome. How are you today?
I'm just happy to be here, Vince. Thank you so much for having me join you here on Covered.
Well, I'm glad on both counts, but I'm delighted to have you join our team. You've been here now with us, a couple of weeks, give or take? Is that right?
I think just about 10 days. It's been great. I'm really enjoying it so far.
So in the couple of weeks you've been here, let's see. You have worked on, I'm trying to think, a couple of pretty cool first-party property claims, right? One was a winter freeze claim. Another one is a wind farm we're working with. And then maybe one of the most interesting liability cases going in the country at the moment, which obviously we're not going to share the specifics of it, but that's what I have in my head. Have I missed anything?
Those are the three. I've been looking at a D&O policy for another client. Right. That one is, I think, going to be very interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, so that's a pretty good mix. So you've had some first party stuff, some BI, some property damage. You've had some CGL stuff, that big liability case we've got, and you've got a D&O case. That's a pretty good blend. Oh, and reps and warranties. You've helped on that as well.
Oh, yes.
So that's a pretty good cross section here. You're off to a great start. And I hope that you're enjoying yourself so far and getting settled in. Have you found, where to get a drink of water, where to find stuff on the printer, all that going okay?
Yes. I immediately on my first day located all the critical places, such as the kitchen and the elevator, the ladies' room, all those things, and they're still there. Mm-hmm. No one has moved them in the past 10 days, so I'm in good shape.
Well, good. They tend not to move those around much, so I feel like if you've learned it already, you're probably going to be good for a while, so that's good. We're delighted to have you off to a good start. Now, part of why you're here, I guess, is because of your past. You worked in a lot of different roles, and insurance kind of came up through them. I wonder, could you tell us in maybe 1 or 2 minutes a little bit about your career? Because it's fascinating, and I know the story, but I think our listeners would love to hear it, and how you ended up here as a policyholder lawyer based on how your career evolved.
Sure. I'd be happy to. You're right that I have done a variety of different things in my career, but insurance has played a part in all of them, actually. So I'm a lawyer, and one of my first jobs was at a law firm in Cleveland, where one of the things I got to do as a young litigator was, at that time, the firm I worked for was representing a municipal self-insurance pool. So I was working on the carrier side for the first few years of my career, where we represented, on behalf of the pool, we represented municipalities, which was very interesting litigation work for a young lawyer. But then pretty soon, I got what I will always say was the best job offer I ever got. The best job I ever had was as an in-house litigator for
that job is better than this one?
Well, it was a pretty good job, Vince. It really was. It was pretty fun.
Give this one time. You may love it.
It was pretty fun.
Sure.
It's true. I've only had this one for 10 days, so I suppose it's still in the running. But I became as a young lawyer, became an in-house litigator for a multinational specialty chemical manufacturer called the Lubrizol Corporation. And for 8 or 10 years, handled all of the company's litigation. And that put me initially in the position of, for the first time in my career, being a policyholder lawyer. And I found it initially to be a little scary, a little intimidating, but over the years grew to love it. And it actually became my most favorite kind of litigation that I did for the company. And the reason it was such a great job is not only because I got to be a better coverage lawyer, but also because I got to know so much about all the different parts of the company. When you're an in-house litigator, you're always meeting people when they really, really need you. They're really, really worried. And so you have a special place in their heart, a special place in their memory, because you're someone who showed up and said they could help. Right. So I made a lot of friends doing that and continued to advance within Lubrizol's legal division. I was lucky enough to have a business role in the company as well as being the company lawyer. By the end of my career, I was the company's chief legal officer. And as part of that, about actually 15 years before I became the chief legal officer, perhaps, the then general counsel, made an interesting play and volunteered to have the legal division run the insurance function for Lubrizol.
Wow.
So for the entire time that I was the general counsel and chief legal officer, we also managed, myself and the team in the legal division, managed the company's insurance procurement and all the claims handling. And then, of course, when there were contested claims, the lawyers took over. But we had a team in-house that essentially acted, or in the legal division, that essentially acted as the company's risk management function, as well as providing legal services. So both as, a young lawyer and as a senior lawyer when I was accountable for managing the insurance function, and even when I was the president of a business, the company's insurance policies were super, super important to me and very interesting. And so that's why I am very glad now that I have this job where I can continue to focus on something that was a constant really through my in-house career and is a really interesting way to practice law.
That's terrific. Thank you for sharing that with us, Suzanne, because I one of the things that so intrigued me when we started talking, and as you thought about the next phase of your career, and I heard about that background and I thought, my gosh, that's all the kinds of things that we do for our clients, right? We help them place coverage and we help them look for gaps and we help them, navigate the claim process. And then if things don't go right there and, we end up in coverage disputes, then we steam in and fight. And those are all the things that you did at Lubrizol. And those are all the things we do for our clients. So I think that's amazing. And I was like, what a great resource to help us do our job better, to help sort of understand how clients, what they need, what they want, what they don't want. And from having been on that side of the equation, that's a wonderful addition to our team. So we're so glad you're here. And I think that's going to help us be able to do a better job for our clients. And that's what we want to do. So what I'd love to hear next, having kind of looked at this from a couple of different ways over a pretty long period of time, my guess is you have some thoughts about how you think that risk management, because, some companies, right, I guess before we jump into the question, some companies have a risk management department that's part of finance or treasury or, whatever, that side of the business. And then some have legal and some have risk management sort of as part of legal. What is your thought based on kind of your experiences? And I gather it's sort of that changed at Lubrizol over the course of your time there. But what do you think is the best way, however it's structured? What do you think is the best way that the risk management folks and the legal team can best work together?
Well, particularly when they're separate, the thing that I think is key is lots and lots of communication. And most companies, I think, do this, but it's valuable to actually reflect and take stock about when communication should happen and making sure that it does happen. So just for example, when you're doing a renewal, it's important, of course, for the risk management team to be looking at terms of the policies, to be looking at the premium, to be making sure that they have the best quality carriers, all these things. But that's a great time also for the risk management team to be talking to the lawyers about the scope of the coverage, about whether we should just be renewing or do we need additional coverages? Do we perhaps not need a coverage that has been historically purchased? And there could be a lot of reasons for that. So the risk managers really need to be talking to the lawyers and also folks in the business as well about what the company's risk profile is then when they're doing the renewal so that they can really carefully evaluate every time they do a renewal, which policies, which coverages are needed going forward. And then, of course, communication also needs to happen once a claim arises. I know that there have been times that I have heard about where a claim has arisen and perhaps the legal department was handling it and they didn't know that there was a coverage that needed to be noticed because they weren't fully familiar with what had been bought. Maybe they were consulted about scope, but then they never got, a separate meeting or a separate communication about here's what we actually bought. And so the lawyers need to know from the risk managers exactly what coverage has been bought. And then the lawyers need to tell the risk managers when there's a claim that can be noticed. So there has to be a two-way street, and it has to be, I think sometimes folks rely on, well, this is just I will know to call you when something happens. But I do think that myself having a series of regular meetings between someone in legal or someone's in legal and risk management and someone in risk management, to have a regular meeting scheduled and to have regular processes that have to be followed really enhances the company's ability to recover on one of the most valuable assets it has, which is its insurance policies. We got to have those two departments talking a lot and formal processes that ensure that. Or it would be something that I would always recommend.
Yeah, no, that's very sound advice, and you think it's a pretty pretty core concept, but sometimes it just gets lost in other things going on, right? And I think that's
absolutely.
You have to really, like so many things in life when it comes to communicating, I mean, you have to really focus on making sure that, does this need to be said? And does it need to be said today? And if so, then, how does it need to be said? And if you kind of go with those three questions, that'll get you most of the way there. But I tell you the classic risk management story, I don't know if this is true or not, but the case study that I read once, and again, it was anonymized, so don't know if it was just an example or if it was a real world scenario, but it was about an auto manufacturer that needed a certain component for making some part of the catalytic converter or the environmental emissions management system. And it relied on a rare earth mineral that was kind of hard to get. There weren't, that many places where you could find it. And so, the company looked at it as, look, this is a supply chain risk for us. We need to manage through this. And so they identified it as a key risk and a possible choke point. And so far, so good, right? They're thinking ahead, trying to, figure out where do we have some vulnerabilities and how do we get ahead of it, right? So this started off really well. And then what happened was the purchasing department said, all right, well, I know how to deal with that risk. I'll lock up a 20-year supply and at favorable rates. And so, we'll have 2 decades of an uninterrupted stream of this commodity. And at the same time, the engineering department said, well, we know how to do this. We'll just engineer around it. So we don't need this component. And then both teams did exactly what they were good at doing. And so when they were done, they had a 20-year supply of a commodity they no longer needed in a market without too many buyers, which meant that it was hard to unload that supply. So it was a crazy situation where, because they didn't communicate, the company ended up worse off than had they done nothing. They would have been better than where they ended up for having done 2 things that were both good but uncoordinated. And that's a breakdown in communication. I mean, these were people trying to do their jobs and trying to help, and they all did it, and they all did a great job. And unfortunately, they just didn't communicate along the way.
Yeah. And that's perfectly natural. They were focused on something that was very important to them and something, as you said, that they were good at. They were good at negotiating a supply contract, or they were good at the engineering around the need for that part. And they weren't really thinking about who else in the company also might be interested in this, or who you might want to talk to before you embark on that. And that's, I think, one of the things that comes up with the lawyers and the risk managers. The lawyers are really good when a problem arises. The lawyers are really good at jumping on it and fixing it and saying, okay, what are we going to do to defend our client? What are we going to do to talk to our safety folks or our engineering folks or manufacturing folks about how to make sure this doesn't happen again? What are we going to do to work with the government if there's a problem there? And so that's where the lawyer's mind immediately goes. But what I was always repeatedly encouraging the folks who worked for me was, another thing that you also have to think about whenever there's a problem, you have to think about not only what is the company's role in this and what should we do to help them, but also who else should be involved here. Should there be insurance involved? Should there be additional insurance? Are there indemnities? And so whenever there's a problem, there's often more than just your client or your company standing around available to pay or to help fix the problem. And that is something that I don't think necessarily comes naturally to the lawyers whose first mission is to try and defend and fix. They don't start thinking as much as they should sometimes about who else can pay here. And so that's when making sure that the risk managers, who are always thinking about that, get involved on the claims.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I mean, we have helped some clients with like enterprise risk management approaches, and those are the kinds of things that are designed to sort of fix that auto scenario or what you're talking about, which is where there are other means for dealing with a problem than just, let's go lawyer it. I mean, there are other ways to lawyer it besides just let's work on our defense.
Yeah, you can fix it, or you can also transfer it, and that's what insurance and indemnities are transferring the risk, right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't fix it. You should fix it, but you should also transfer it, and that's why we employ a whole group of people to go out and buy insurance, and we have the lawyers who are drafting all those contract provisions that turn out to be useful. When there's a risk that results in some liability that has been transferred.
Right. So Okay, so those are how some things can go wrong. How have you seen things go right on these kinds of issues? Can you think of a scenario? And of course, everything that you do is privileged, so no need for specifics. But can you think of a scenario where either your company or maybe back when you were a lawyer, before, an outside counsel before, where something had gone right, and because these different groups had been working together and communicating, can you think of an issue where you were able to help solve a problem through this kind of stuff?
Well, I think that one of the most important things, and I do think most companies do this, but I'm not sure about that, so I'll mention it, is that when you have a corporate crisis of any kind, there's often a corporate process that tells you who is on the team, and how that team responds, who calls who, and how the meetings go, and who's in charge. It is really critical, I think, to have somebody from risk management or insurance or whatever it's called in your company actually on the crisis management team, so that they are aware as soon as possible of any event that is impacting the company. Because many of those events, not all of them, but many of those events, you may want to have an insurance company noticed. You may want to have other risk transfer mechanisms put into place that you have. So having somebody who knows right away and can provide the appropriate notices to all the appropriate carriers is really important. And that's where I have seen it work very well, is when you get the insurance company involved sooner. They don't always, of course, determine coverage and pay up to limits, but they also are a lot easier, in my experience, to work with when they have been noticed promptly and when they have the opportunity to comment on the company's response to a crisis, for example. Again, the company doesn't have to do what the insurer says, but the insurers are often a lot easier to deal with when you have let them in and listened to them as the event is unfolding in the first days.
Yeah. Now that's sound advice. I mean, it's one of the things that I think is actually pretty cool about our practice here, and having been around, on this kind of, I know you've spent your time in crisis management, crisis response incidents, and whether it's planning or actual execution, either way. And what's really neat about our practice is if you look at, most major law firms, right, they might have crisis response folks and crisis management teams, people experienced at handling these kinds of incidents. But most major law firms represent insurance companies or just kind of aren't in the insurance space at all. We're one of the very few with really top flight crisis response folks and a policyholder practice. So we can go to a client and say, look, we can handle your entire situation. We've got strategic communications, we can handle, if you've got governmental investigations, all those kinds of things and lawsuits, we can handle litigation and we can handle the insurance, which is really nice for us to tell a client, look, we are a turnkey operation. You don't have to go coordinate 4 different law firms and scheduling conference calls becomes impossible, and you get, sort of more expensive bills because there's inefficiencies by multiple law firms, and they all need to know what's going on. And we can, do it on a more coordinated basis and usually a more cost-effective basis. But I remember in Deepwater Horizon, one of the I was involved in that, and we were involved in I was chasing additional insured coverage, and then at the same time we were defending, and the arguments for what helped on additional insured didn't really help for the defense side of things, and so we had to find a way to coordinate those, and that's another benefit. And it's not just is it easier, more convenient, is it cheaper? It's all of those things, but also you can identify real strategic benefits to doing it. And that's one thing I love about being here is we can offer that to our clients. Hopefully they never need it because it's just a really awful situation for them to be in. But I am glad that we can help them if they find themselves in that spot.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical to get, if you have a big loss, it's absolutely critical to get not only the insurance company noticed as soon as possible, but get coverage counsel involved as soon as possible. Because to your point, the way that a claim is managed, the way that a claim, the way that the documents are characterized, for example, the way that you're communicating with your insurance company can have really significant consequences to what coverages are triggered, what limits are available, how the claim is handled. And you want to have, when you have an insurance carrier involved very early, you want to have somebody who is on your side who can explain to you here's what the carrier said. Here's the things you need to do. Here are the things that it's up to you to choose. And here's the way we're going to respond to the carrier. Here's how we're going to characterize what is going on. Here's the narrative that we're going to be explaining to the carrier, so that you can truthfully put things in a way that maximizes your recovery, because you've paid for that. You've paid premiums for that. And so you need to be thinking really early on in any situation with a large claim about the end game of getting the claim paid. And sometimes it can make a really big difference, the things you say and how you manage the situation early on in early days.
Right. That's totally right. Okay. So, Suzanne, we have a bit of a tradition here at Covered. We always ask our guests, who are just amazing people in this space, what they have worked on all kinds of interesting, crazy, big, whatever word you want to use for that, kinds of claims. And I wonder, is there any claim as you look back on your career, and it could be one of the ones you're handling now here with us, but has there been anything that you've worked on that you thought, wow, this is either crazy or it's really, our job is to make our clients better off. But is there any claim you think about, I was really glad to be a part of that, and because it was interesting to you for some reason or another? If you have a story you want to share, I'm sure our audience would love to hear it.
The one that sticks out in my head is not necessarily because of the coverage issues that were involved, although those were very interesting, I will say. Mm-hmm. But I have a vivid memory of the reaction from insurance counsel, who was sitting in a courtroom when a judge issued from the bench her judgment. So I had been involved in a long bench trial that went on for years and years, actually, as bench trials sometimes can. And the client that I was representing had insurance coverage, and there was actually a deck action that was pending at the time. And we'd had lots and lots of discussions with the carriers about the fact that there was insurance, the limits that would apply, any exclusions, all these things. So the insurers were very interested in the trial as it was going on, and had attended most or all of it.
Right.
And then this judge who decided that because this case had gone on so long and it had made such an impression on her and her family, that as a prelude to her judgment, she would take the bench in her robes and read to all of the lawyers, including the insurance counsel, a limerick that explained her views on the case. That had been at least in part authored by her daughter. And
who was how old?
This young daughter. And this case eventually went up to the Fifth Circuit. Sure. I think with that in the record, that the judgment of the case, for which this insurance company ultimately ended up paying 7 figures, was delivered in the form of a limerick.
Oh my gosh.
And the faces of the assembled lawyers are something that I remember to this day.
That is fantastic. My only regret to hearing the story is we didn't do it for a St. Patrick's Day episode, which would have made that just even better. That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm going to have to go look up that case now and read it. I did not remember
it's
that.
A published opinion.
That's awesome.
I don't know if it's a published opinion, but I will tell you that later in that judge's chambers for another case, and the poem itself is framed and it hangs on her wall in her chambers.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a wonderful story. There you go. I mean, that's going to make our list of best stories. So thank you for that. And I think this has been really great chatting with you. Do you have any thoughts or other ideas you'd like to explore? If not, we'd love to welcome you back to future episodes. But for now, that was all I wanted to ask. I just, last word, if you have one.
Maybe I could make a request that in future episodes, I could be doing the interviewing instead of the answering of the questions. Granted, I think it's probably going to be better for everybody if you take over, if you drive. So that would be great. Well, you can ask the questions too, Vince. I'm just saying that I think that I'm better in the asking seat than in the answering seat. Yeah, well, you are a lawyer. That is what we do. So I get it. Fair enough. Well, we will do that. And again, for now, this has been really great, Suzanne. Thank you for sharing your background and some insights on what worked, what didn't. And we're delighted to have you and all of that expertise that's inside your head here working with us now. And I think our clients are better off for it. So thank you. Welcome to the team. Thanks very much, Vince.